Metro near Apollo Square, 1959. Hurrying out the passage from the metro, Diane McClintock once more felt lost, though in fact she'd come here for a reason. She was here to find Atlas. Even so, she was overcome with a sensation of insubstantiality, of being a mere ghost wandering a palace. And then, near the blockade at the entrance into Apollo Square, something caught her eye. A poster, plastered to the metal wall. It asked, "Who is Atlas?" Just those 3 words, under a stylized heroic image of a stoic, confident, clean-shaven man in rolled-up shirt sleeves and suspenders, fists on his hips, gazing with visionary intensity into the working man's future. The one time she'd seen him outside the cafe, he'd seemed like an ordinary man. Good-looking, sturdy, but ordinary. And yet he was doing an extraordinary thing, risking Ryan's constables by engaging in flagrant altruism. At the very least, Atlas must be a charismatic man, someone who could inspire her, end her feeling of aimlessness. She turned to the bearded sentry cradling a shotgun at the blockade, a burly, unshaven man in a work shirt and oil-spotted blue jeans.
"Listen, could you tell me? I saw him once, in Pauper's Drop. Atlas. He was passing out supplies. I'd like to talk to him. Maybe I could help. When I saw him in Pauper's Drop,
She shook her head.
I felt something."
The sentry looked at her, as if deciding whether or not she was sincere. Then he nodded. "I know what you mean. But I don't know as I can trust you." Diane looked around to see if anyone was watching. Then she took a wad of Rapture dollars out of her purse.
"Please, this is all I could get a hold of today. I'll pay my way in, but I have to see him."
He looked at the money, swallowed hard. Then he reached out, grabbed it, and hid it inside a coat pocket. "Hold up right here." The bearded sentry turned and called out to another, older sentry. They spoke in low tones. The bearded sentry turned and winked at her. The older guard hurried off. The sentry went back to his post, whistling to himself. With one hand, he gestured her to wait. Then he pretended not to see her. Had she thrown away her bribe? Maybe she'd thrown away her life. Spider splicers watched Apollo Square from high up on the walls. It was nippy, unevenly lit in Apollo Square tonight, and there were dead men rotting not so far away. The smell made her feel sick. She was still slightly drunk, the space around her whirling ever so slowly, and she thought she might throw up if she had to smell the dead bodies much longer. But she wasn't leaving. She was going to stick around till the splicers got her, or she got in to see Atlas. If Ryan didn't want her, she decided, maybe someone else would. A woman hurried up the barricade.
"Atlas says, okay, he'll see you, McClintock,"
said the woman. Diane tried not to stare at the woman's scarred face. One of her eye sockets was covered over by scar tissue. Her brown hair was matted.
"Philo, you come on in with us."
The shotgun-toting Philo nodded and gestured at Diane with the muzzle of his gun. "You go in ahead of me." Diane thought about backing out, but she stepped through the scrapwood gate and followed them across Apollo Square to Artemis Suites. The one-eyed woman stepped over a low pile of trash in the doorway. Diane followed her into the reeking interior of the building. Stomach lurching as she picked her way through moldy garbage, Diane entered a stairway that zigzagged up a graffiti-tagged concrete and steel shaft. They climbed 4 stories up, past drunks and groups of grubby children. Her escorts took her through a doorway and down a carpeted, burn-scarred hall. The little bushy-haired woman never hesitated, and Philo clumped along behind Diane. The lights flickered again. "Lights might go out," Philo remarked, his voice a slow rumble. "Ryan's turned off the power in the building. We got them jerry-rigged, but it ain't reliable."
"I got a flashlight,"
the woman said. They came to another stairway, and to Diane's bafflement, this time they went down. This stairway was relatively clean. occupied only by the occasional bored sentry, scratching himself and nodding as they passed. Down and down they went, further down than they'd gone up, down a sub-basement passageway. Here, they passed under steam-shrouded pipes, their feet splashing through puddles till they came to a small antechamber with a high, water-dripping ceiling. A Securus door was guarded by a grinning, shivering splicer in a ratty sweater and torn trousers, toes sticking out of his decaying shoes. He had the hardcore splicer's red scrofula on his face, and he juggled 3 scythe-like fish-cutting blades from hand to hand. The curved blades hissed close to the naked light bulb on the ceiling, missing it by no more than a 1/4 inch.
"Who's the extra bitch, tittle-tattle tits?"
the splicer asked in a scratchy voice, never pausing in juggling the blades.
"McClintock, Alice says she can go in."
"Says you? Tittle-tattle tits. We'll fry your bits if that ain't it. Ha! Go ahead on in."
The splicer stepped aside, still juggling, and Tittle-tattle tits opened the Securus door for them. Diane hurried through, eager to get past the splicer. They were in a lamp-lit utility area. Pipes and heating ducts came up through the floor near the walls. The room was warm and smelled of cigarette smoke, and mildew, and brine. The cigarette was being smoked by a muscular man seated casually behind a battered gray metal desk. On the desk was a tumbler and a gold cigarette box. It was he, the man she'd seen outside the cafe. He wore white, rolled-up shirt sleeves, just like in the poster. A good face, she thought, that seemed to emanate trustworthiness. 2 shaggy bodyguards stood behind him, near a ganglion of valves. Both bodyguards wore coveralls and carried Tommy guns. One of them had an unlit pipe dangling from the corner of his mouth.
"I'd be Atlas,"
said the man at the desk with an Irish lilt, looking her over with an unsettling frankness.
"And you're one of Ryan's birds." "I'm Diane McClintock. I worked for Mr. Ryan. I saw you helping people in Pauper's Drop, and it touched me. I don't feel good about the way things are going, and I wanted to see if..."
What was it she wanted, exactly? He smiled impishly. "You don't seem certain of what you're wanting to see, Miss McClintock." She sighed and unconsciously brushed her hair into place with her hand.
"I'm tired. Had a few drinks, but I want to know more about you. I mean, you know, in a friendly way. I don't work with the constables. I've seen things, heard stories. I don't know what to believe anymore. I just know once I was passing by Apollo Square, and I saw a woman coming over the barricade, and one of the splicers working for Andrew."
She didn't like to remember it. The woman, hurrying along, full of life one moment, the next, a splicer had sent a ball of fire into her, and she'd sizzled away into a blackened corpse, within steps of where Diane stood.
"Well, the splicer burned her, and the look on her face, like she was trying to tell me something. So tonight, I don't know, I'm just so tired right now."
"Get the lady a chair, you great idiot," Atlas growled at Philo. Without a word, Philo brought a metal chair from a corner and Diane sat down. Atlas pushed the gold box across the desk towards her. "Cigarette?"
"I'd adore one."
She opened the box and took a cigarette, her hands trembling. Philo lit it for her and she inhaled gratefully, then blew the silken smoke into the air.
This is a real cigarette. Virginia tobacco, and in a gold box. You do yourself well for a revolutionary."
Atlas chuckled. "Oh, aye. But we took that one from one of Ryan's little storerooms under Rapture. Sure, he brought it in to sell in a little shop. A shop I used to sweep out, once upon a time. I was maintenance, a janitor in Rapture. Come here when they sang me a pretty lie. A promise of working in me trade. Ended up a janitor. And later, couldn't find work doing even that.
What was your trade? Before?
Why, I was a metal worker. He stubbed out his cigarette. His fingers looked pale and soft for a working man. As for what we took from that storeroom, we distributed most of it to the people. How do you think folks eat round here? With Ryan, the great son of Satan himself, cutting off supplies to Artemis, eh? She nodded.
He's talked about amnesty for people who give up the... what does he call it? The Bolshevik organizing.
Bolshevik organizing? So we're Soviets now. Asking for a fair break is hardly that. She tapped the cigarette over an ashtray on the desk.
Any sort of break is pinko stuff to Andrew. I'm fed up with him. But I've got no reason to love you people either. You can see what you did to me.
She touched the scars on her cheek. He shook his head sadly. You were hurt in the fight, were you? A bomb. You're still a fine-looking woman, so you are. You were too strong to die there. Why? You've gotten character from it. That's all that's come about, Diane. He looked at her with that disarming frankness, and she wanted to believe in him.
Why do you call yourself Atlas? It's not your real name.
Figure that out on your own, did you? He grinned. Well, Atlas takes the world on his shoulders. He's the broadback, ain't he? And who's the working man? The working man takes the world on his broadback too. Holds it up for the privileged, for the likes of you. He opened the drawer and, to her astonishment, took out a bottle of what looked like actual Irish whiskey. Care for hair of the dog, maybe? Philo, find us some glasses. They drank and talked of politics and fairness and organizing and reappropriation of goods for the working class.
And you think you're the liberator of the working class, Atlas?
I am not a liberator. Liberators do not exist. That's the only thing Ryan was right about. These people will liberate themselves, but they do need someone to tell them that it can be done. He toyed with his glass, then he said, You know about the Little Sisters, do you? What they do to them poor little orphan waifs.
I've heard. Yes, it bothers me. If that's what you're wondering.
He poured her a third drink. Sure, and it should bother you, he said solemnly, lighting another cigarette. It should cut you up inside. I've got a little girl myself, you know. The thought of them bastards maybe getting hold of that child. Oh, the thought. But will it stop anyone from buying Adam? No. Rapture can't go on like this, Diane, me dear. This cannot go on. It didn't take long for her to make up her mind. It wasn't the whiskey, or the cigarettes, or that strong chin, or those frank brown eyes, or the pungent opinions. It was thinking about going back to her place alone, and waiting to hear from Andrew Ryan. No, never again.
Atlas,
she said.
I'd like to help.
And why would I believe Ryan hasn't sent you here on the sly like? Will you tell me that now?
I'll show you. I'm no spy. I'll do things he would never approve of. And then, you'll know you can trust me.
Ryan Plasmids, 1959. The odd little chamber, partly cold steel-walled lab and partly nursery, was chilly today. Drops of cold water slipped from a rusty bolt in the ceiling in a far corner. Bridget had told maintenance about the leak, but so far no one had come to fix it. Subject 15 didn't mind. The little girl played contentedly with the drip as Bridget watched, the girl seeming to delight in this tiny little invasion of the gigantic ocean into her cell. Squatting in the corner, the child tried to catch each drop as it came down. She giggled when she caught one. Bridget sighed. The experiments had been going well. The attachment conditioning was working, but she felt heavier every day, as if she were carrying some hidden burden. She was beginning to feel like a big daddy herself, as if she too were sheathed in metal. The thought reminded Bridget it was time. She went to the door, opened it, took the remote control from her lab coat pocket, and pointed the device at the hulking gray metal figure waiting dormant in the corner. Somewhere inside that metal armor was what remained of a man, who was now in a sort of comatose state, waiting for the stimuli to awaken, but never completely awaken. He would always be little more than a machine. She pressed the button on the remote, and the Big Daddy responded instantly, turning with a creak, coming with clanging steps into the conditioning lab.
Ooh.
Subject 15 chirped, clasping her wet hands together with delight when she saw the Big Daddy.
Mr. Bubbles is here.
Bridget Tenenbaum watched as Subject 15 walked, almost like a sleepwalker, to the Big Daddy. The little girl clasped its metal hand and gazed up at it, smiling uncertainly. And suddenly, for the first time in many years, Bridget Tenenbaum remembered. She's a girl, once more, in Belarus, watching the Nazis take her father away. It is before the war, but they are removing troublemakers. The Nazi officer in charge of the platoon turns his gray-eyed gaze on her. He's a big, craggy-faced man wearing a helmet, his hands in heavy gloves. He wears a glossy leather belt, a strap across his chest, and high, polished, glossy leather boots. He glints with shiny buttons and medals. He says,
"Little one, you can be of use. First in the kitchens, working. In time, you go to the camps. Experimental subjects are needed."
He reaches out to her. She stares up at him, thinking he's more like a machine than a man. Her father took her to a silent movie in which she saw a man made of metal, stalking about. This officer is a man of metal in a uniform, metal clothed in flesh. She knows she'll never see her father again. She will be alone. And this man is reaching out to her. Something closes up in her heart. She thinks,
I must make friends with the metal man.
She reaches out and clasps the gloved hand. And now, in rapture, Bridget Tenenbaum shuddered, remembering the little girl that she was, and the woman she became. Even before that day, she'd been distant from people. She'd always had a hard time connecting, but she kept a door in herself open, a crack. It was at that moment, clasping the officer's hand, that she closed the door that she'd always kept open for her family. She would simply survive. Now, Bridget stood there, staring at Subject 15 and the model of the Big Daddy. Subject 15, another child conditioned to attach herself to a machine. Metal men clothed in flesh, and in rapture, metal men enclosing flesh. Subject 15 was a child, twisted. Her childlike nature distorted for rapture's purposes. A child so much like the little girl Bridget had been. Bridget shuddered.
"Not this one,"
she whispered.
"No more."
She felt herself turn inside out as she said it. Feelings geysered up in her, seething in her heart. She was once more a child, and she would become a mother. She would be a mother with many adopted children. She could no longer treat these children as experimental subjects. She went to the child and embraced her.
"I am sorry,"
she said, tears streaming down her cheeks.
"I'm so sorry."
Mercury Suites, 1959. What is the difference between a man and a parasite? The words came over the public address system, reverberating from the metal walls as Bill walked down the hall to Sullivan's place. A camera swiveled to watch him as he came. A man builds, came Andrew Ryan's recorded voice. A parasite asks, where is my share? A man creates. A parasite says, what will the neighbors think? A man invents. A parasite says, watch out, or you might tread on the toes of God. Bill was beginning to think the parasite might be right about that last one. He knocked on the apartment door, and Sullivan himself opened it. The security chief glanced past him to make sure he was alone, then nodded.
Come on in.
Bill could smell the booze on Sullivan's breath, and the chief of security's gait was unsteady as he walked away from the door. Sullivan's place was laid out pretty much like his own, but it was sparer, bachelor furnishings, and there was another feature: a good many dead soldiers, empty bottles on tables and desks, even some on the carpet. Sullivan sat on the sofa, shoving an empty bottle out of the way to put a tape recorder down on the coffee table. Bill sat beside him. To their left was a big picture window into the underseascape. The building creaked in the current. A school of yellowfin fish cruised by and suddenly changed direction, all of them at once darting away from the building's lights with that mysterious unanimity they had.
"Drink?"
Sullivan asked, his voice lifeless. His eyes were red-rimmed, and it looked like he hadn't slept in a while. It was early for Bill, not yet 5, but he didn't want to seem like he was judging Sullivan.
Just a finger or two of whatever's in that bottle there, mate.
Sullivan poured it into a glass that hadn't been clean in a long while, and Bill picked it up.
What's all the rush and worry, Chief? Urgent notes from you popping out the pneumo and all. I had to cut work early to get here on time.
Sullivan turned to look at an unfinished red and black knitted blanket folded beside him on the sofa. He reached out with his free hand and caressed it, lip trembling. Then he tossed off his drink and put the glass down on the coffee table with a clack.
Ryan's starting his little propaganda campaign to make the little sister thing seem all hunky-dory. Using kids to farm plasmids. That gonna be hunky-dory with you, Bill?
Christ, no. I don't like plasmids. Don't like 'em double when they get 'em that way. Ryan says it's only temporary, and what do you do with the orphans anyhow, but...
He shook his head.
It can't go on forever. Things are falling apart. The city and the people. The whole place will come apart at the seams if we don't...
He broke off, wondering suddenly if he was being a fool, talking something close to sedition to Ryan's chief of security. Was all this a setup? But Sullivan had been unhappy with his job for a long time, and he'd made Bill a kind of confidant. You had to trust someone sometimes, and he knew Chief Sullivan after all these years. Sullivan wasn't much of an actor, especially when he was drunk. This was for real.
It's already come apart at the seams, Bill,
Sullivan said slurringly.
I've got some recordings here. I've put them all on one tape, but they come from different times, different people.
He pressed the play button on the tape recorder.
I want your opinion on this, Bill. You're the only son of a bitch I trust in this waterlogged city.
The tape recorder played a guitar strumming a mocking little tune. Someone whistling along in the background. A gentle drum beat led the way to singing that Bill recognized as Anna Culpepper's voice. When Sullivan hit pause, Bill shrugged and said,
Well, what about it, Chief? I've heard this kind of daft thing before. She's swaned out of Ryan Industries and been hanging around McDonough's, if truth be told. Drinking and trying to be clever with her friends, snipping at Ryan. Songs like that are right popular with some about Rapture, but they don't sing 'em too loud.
Sullivan snorted.
You don't think it deserves punishment?
Why? Just a song, isn't it?
Okay, how about this?
Sullivan started the tape again. This time it was Anna Culpepper just talking.
Cohen's not a musician. He's Ryan's stable boy. Ryan's corrupt policies crap all over the place, and Cohen flutters around clearing it up. But instead of using a shovel like you would with a proper mule, Cohen tidies with a catchy melody and a clever turn of phrase. But no matter how nicely it sounds, he can't really do anything about the smell.
He paused it again, poured himself another drink, and voice slurring even more, asked,
What do you think about that one, eh?
Well, got to admit it's pretty inflammatory, like, Chief, but them artsy types will talk and talk and talk. Don't mean much.
You know what? Listen to this. This is one of the guys we had to raid recently. He ducked us. I'm glad of it. Between you and me, Bill, it's from before Fontaine went down.
He hit play, and Bill heard a voice he thought was Peach Wilkins.
We all come down here, figured we'd be part of Ryan's great chain. Turns out Ryan's chain is made of gold, and ours are the sort with the big iron ball around your ankle. He's up in Fort Frolic banging fashion models. We're down in this dump yanking guts out of fish. Fontaine's promising something better.
Sounds like that Atlas rabble-rouser, Bill remarked. Different voice, same ideas.
Now, listen to this one, Bill,
Sullivan said.
This is the same guy, Bill Aaron.
Fontaine's putting the screws on us in double. He's squeezing us out of 80 points of our cut with the threat of turning us into Ryan if we don't play ball. Son of a bitch. Sammy G comes and tells me he's thinking of going to the constable, and the next day, Sammy G was found in a sack in the salt pond. We got no choice here.
He stopped the tape and poured himself another drink, swaying in his seat.
You see, Bill? Do you see?
Not exactly, Chief.
See, first, they get pulled into Rapture. Like you did, like I did. Then they find out it's not all it's cracked up to be. And if you're not one of the big shots, then Fontaine drags them into his own little chain. They want out when it turns bad too, so what happens? Some of them start turning up dead. So what can they do? They got stuck working for Fontaine. And what happens? Ryan sends us in to catch him. Hanging them for smuggling for something they were trapped into.
I don't know if that was their only choice, Chief, but I see what you mean.
And then there's that Persephone.
Bill winced.
Hate the thought of that place. Been afraid I'd end up there myself.
Lamb's taken over that whole part of Rapture. Made Persephone her base. Who gave her that base? Ryan. Ryan's who? Torturing people to find Lamb's followers. And just creating more followers for Lamb.
Torture? I never knew about that.
He didn't want you to know, Bill. To catch some of them, the Persephone Reds, the smugglers, Ryan not only used torture, but he personally supervised at least one session I know of, with Pat Cavendish doing the dirty work. Torture.
Bill's stomach twisted at the thought.
You sure, Chief?
Oh yeah. I had to clean up the mess. The mess. Well, maybe they had it coming. Maybe. But this girl, it's called Pepper. All she did was bitch and moan. Or sing, if you want to call it that. Sang another funny, stupid little tune about that Looney Tune Sander Cohen. You want to know how much a Looney Tune he is? Listen to this.
He started the recorder playing once more. Sander Cohen's distinctly demented voice minced through a recitation.
The Wild Bunny by Sander Cohen. I want to take the ears off, but I can't. I hop, and when I hop, I never get off the ground. It's my curse, my eternal curse. I want to take the ears off, but I can't. It's my curse. My fucking curse. I want to take the ears off. Please, take them off. Please.
Roy,
Bill said when it ended.
we already knew the bloke was eccentric, Chief.
Eccentric. He's a murderer. Gone nuts on Adam. Kills people for fun over there in Fleet Hall. Pastes their bodies up with plaster. Makes them into statues for display in his back room.
Bill stared.
You're pulling me leg.
No, I'm not. Like to lock him up, but Ryan insists Cohen's an ally.
He shook his head miserably.
Ryan's protecting him.
Cohen whined about Culpepper's songs making fun of him. Said they were subjecting Ryan to ridicule too. Sent over tapes of it. Ryan's gone a bit mad himself.
Not taking Adam, is he?
Ryan? No. He's been getting to the gin. Stays cool sometimes. Paranoid other times. 2 days sober, 1 half drunk. Not a good pattern, I know it too well.
Bill licked his lips. His mouth was suddenly dry.
No excuse for protecting Cohen if he's really a murderer.
He took a long pull on the whiskey Sullivan had given him, and scarcely tasted it.
So me having to protect that little prick Cohen,
Sullivan growled.
That extends to Ryan giving me orders to...
His voice broke. He reached over and picked up the red and black knit blanket, clutched it to his chest.
Pretty, isn't it? When I was done with her, I left her as she was in the bathroom, naked in the tub.
Bill stared.
What do you mean when you were done with her?
Sullivan closed his eyes, clutching the blanket to him, the sudden motion spilling his drink on his lap.
I seen she had a half-knitted blanket by her bed. It was nice, you know. Black and red. Real pretty. So I took it, you know. Just didn't seem right to leave it lying there. All by itself.
Bill finished his drink. Thought maybe he should get out of here. Well, Sullivan still let him. But at last he asked,
Chief, are you saying that Ryan sent you to kill Anna Culpepper?
Sullivan looked at the blanket. After a long moment, he nodded.
In her bath. Pushed her under the water. Her eye. Bill. Her eyes. Staring at me through the water as I held her under. When the bubbles come up, I was thinking, there goes her life, you know? Her life. Bubbling up from her mouth. Just like the bubbles that come up outside that window. You see them?
Oh, Jesus. Chief, that's... Bill took a long, deep, ragged breath. Not sure what to say. He almost felt like he ought to comfort Sullivan.
Sorry you went through that, mate.
But you couldn't say that to a murderer.
Chief, I've got to get back to my wife. It was too late to do anything about it. We have to let it go. And I want you to know it's all safe with me, mate, what you said.
Oh, I can't let it go,
Sullivan said, his eyes closed, voice barely audible.
I'm going to Neptune's bounty. I'm gonna find a soft spot and...
Bill got up, backed away from him, then hurried to the door, and left without another word.
Ryan Plasmids, 1959. Fully dressed, Bridget Tenenbaum lay on her cot, staring at the steel wall. She knew she would not sleep that night. She kept seeing their faces, gazing up at the metal men adoringly. The little sisters, their large, dark, trusting eyes. She could not bear it anymore. The way they would lovingly climb into her lap. The cruelty of their innocence. She must act. She must find relief. She could run away, hide alone in some corner of Rapture. There was that old maintenance dorm she'd found, but hiding there, alone, wouldn't work. Their eyes, their faces, would pursue her there. There would be no hiding from them. No, the only way was to set them free from this place. Then she would no longer feel their pain. Their release would also be hers. Now was as good a time as any. The sentries had been gathering out front late at night, and it would be necessary to shut off the cameras and bots. But she knew just how to do that. She would find some way to get past the fourth man later. Perhaps she might have to kill him. Bridget reached under her bunk and found the bottle of vodka. She'd bought it from Karlowski, but it hadn't really helped smother the cruel feelings of caring for the children that had arisen in her. She'd given up after half a bottle, which left half a bottle. She opened the label-less bottle, took a mouthful, swished it around, then spat it out onto her lab coat. She got her keys from the hook on the wall, then went out into the hallway. A security camera swiveled towards her and sent a bot from its cabinet to look at her. It registered her DNA detection flasher, circled her once, then whirred back to its container. She kept on down the hallway, made a stop in Lab 16, then came back out into the corridor, and stopped dead. 2 sentries were scowling at her, blocking the way with shotguns in their hands. The tall, sallow-faced guard in the overalls was Rolf. She didn't know the squat one with the bad teeth. He had a constable badge pinned upside down on an old military coat.
"What are you doing wandering around? This ain't your work time, lady,"
Rolf asked, squinting at her suspiciously. Bridget blinked at them, swaying in what she hoped was a good simulation of drunkenness.
"Could not sleep. Lonely. Thinking maybe I will make myself pretty to visit you. Maybe I will take shower. Yes? Maybe you join me in shower. Eh?"
Rolf's mouth dropped open. Nothing had ever surprised him more, but she could see he wanted to believe it. The short one scratched his matted hair.
"Well now, you mean just Rolf here?" "Oh no, plenty of room for everyone. We take turns, yes?"
Pretending to swig the vodka, she turned to point at the showers at the far end of the hall. She turned and grinned at them with bleary inebriation.
"You take bottle and wait there, eh? I will make myself pretty."
No. Too many cameras," Rolf began.
"If someone checks, I will turn them off,"
Bridget insisted, waving the problem away.
"It is nothing."
"Hey, what's a-going on down here?" called a red-headed man with a Tommy gun in one hand, a flashlight in the other. He came stalking down the hall, lower lip thrust out disapprovingly, but his expression changed. It became sheer lust when he saw the bottle in her hand, and not lust for her.
"Is that wine?"
Bridget shook her head at him.
"No, much stronger. You want?"
She thrust the bottle into his grasp.
"You take the vodka to shower. I will take care of cameras. You can share with these boys, yes? We have small party."
She wagged a finger at them.
"But you must not be naughty boys in the shower."
She turned away, laughing, and staggered away in the direction of the auto-security control panels. She heard them walking off, muttering towards the showers. Rolf saying,
I don't know, maybe just a drink or two, but there's no way we..."
She used the combination lock, switched off the security cameras and bots, and then went to check the showers. It was already done. The overwhelming dose of sleeping powder she'd put in the vodka had done its work, and quickly. All 3 sentries were sprawled, snoring on the floor. She unloaded 2 of the shotguns, taking the shells, then carried the 3rd shotgun away with her. She got the leather tote bag she needed with the equipment for removing the sea slugs and some canned food. She stuffed it all in the bag. The purging device would cause the sea slugs to disintegrate inside the children. They would vomit up the remains. Bridget hurried down the dimly lit hall to the row of children's cells. She leaned the shotgun against the wall before she let the girls out, not wanting to scare them. She put a finger to her lips to signify quiet as she let each one out and winked.
"Now, children,"
she whispered as they gathered around her, a diminutive crowd.
"We will play a game of quiet, like hide and seek. We will get the other girls, and then..." "Someone's coming,"
said one of the Moppets. Bridget heard the heavy footsteps then, probably the 4th sentry, who stood out in the hallway.
"Hey, the system's down,"
he called from around the corner of the corridor.
Children, we will go back into this nursery together. All of us. And we will wait till he goes by. We will trick him.
The children giggled mischievously, and she hushed them, herding them into the nursery cell. One of them lay on the cot, pretending to be asleep. The others pressed into a corner near the door, squatting in excited silence with Bridget. A few moments more, and they heard the guard striding by. "Rolf," the man called. "Where the hell you got to? The system's down. Christ, if the splicers have got in." Bridget and the little sisters waited, another long, slow minute. She guessed it'd be 2 or 3 minutes before the 4th Century found the others, sleeping in the showers. There was no time to get any more children out. They were far down the hallway. She'd lose the ones she had if she tried. Heart pounding, Bridget stood up and whispered,
"We must go like ghosts, quiet as ghosts." "The ghosts aren't so quiet,"
a black-haired little sister remarked, twirling the ends of her hair around a finger.
"I hear them talking all the time." "Then be quieter than the ghosts. Come, children."
Bridget opened the door and they tiptoed through. She herded them around the hallway corner, toward the front door of the facility. They were almost running when they reached the outer corridor. The cameras out there were still angling inertly down, but that wouldn't last. They got across the anteroom to the metro just as the alarms went off behind them, but she managed to get all the little sisters with her into the bathysphere. She knew an abandoned dorm that might do for a safe house. It was a dusty place, almost forgotten now, in the basement corner of the city. There she could clear the sea slugs from the children and give them a chance to be human beings. They would lose something, but they would gain much more. And perhaps the cruelty of her maternal instinct would transmute, and her pain would become joy.
Rapture Central Control. Ryan's office. 1959. Andrew Ryan hit record on the AccuBox. I am told that Lamb has been seen in the streets. Come out of her sanctum in Persephone. Rapture's split up between our territories, the Atlas turf and Lamb's little group of psychos. My city is schismed. One of the Alpha series was killed in the incident, and his bonded sister stolen. But the Council has no time for a manhunt. Atlas swells the ranks of his marauders by the day. Regardless, Lamb's name has already faded among the people. She is no more than a ghost who has forgotten to die. A chime came on the desk. He heard Karlowski's voice over the intercom. Boss, Dr. Suchong is here.
Ryan switched off the tape recorder. Very good. Send him in. He opened his desk drawer, drew out the folder containing Suchong's proposal, and scanned it again as the doctor came padding in. Ryan was distantly aware of Suchong bowing. Yes, sit down. He heard the squeak of Suchong sitting in the chair and went on. I've looked over this little plan of yours. Frankly, Dr. Suchong, I'm shocked by your proposal. Ryan glanced up from the folder, tented his fingers, closing his eyes as if considering the idea objectively, though in fact he'd already made up his mind. If we were to modify the structure of our commercial plasmid line as you propose, to make the user vulnerable to mental suggestion, would we not be able to effectively control the actions of citizens of Rapture? Free will is the cornerstone of this city. The thought of sacrificing it is abhorrent. Suchong, sitting across from Ryan, nodded, somehow conveying apology, disappointing Ryan by acquiescing. He had hoped Suchong would talk him into it. However, we are indeed in a time of war. If Atlas and his bandits have their way, will they not turn us into slaves? And what will become of free will then? Desperate times call for desperate measures. And after all, if you say Fontaine knew of this sort of thing, then it could be working its way to Atlas. We can't let them get the edge on us, Suchong.
Suchong looked at him attentively. Then you approve of Suchong's plan. We can proceed with pheromone conditioning.
If you can guarantee the splicers respond to me, not to anyone else.
Suchong works for Ryan. I will see to it.
And what does Tenenbaum think? Does she think there might be a means to block this hormonal control?
Suchong shrugged. Suchong think not, but not sure where she is. Cannot ask.
What? Why not?
You do not know. I assume guards reported to you. She is gone, hiding somewhere in Rapture. Took little sisters with her.
No one told me this. Ryan laughed softly and bitterly. Who got to Tenenbaum? Was she paid to do this? By Atlas?
Something bothered her for long time, Mr. Ryan.
Had an attack of conscience, has she?
Suchong blinked, not knowing what was meant. The English word conscience was one he hadn't bothered to learn. She is troubled female. She says we are harming children even though we give them immortality. We give them power to always heal. This is harming? Suchong does not think so.
I see.
Ryan picked up a pencil and flipped it from finger to finger. He was not convinced the little sisters were happy little elves working away for Rapture, but he was convinced that Adam was Rapture's edge on the outside world. Suppose they were ever invaded. KGB, CIA, some other insidious intelligence lurkers would infiltrate. Perhaps this new pernicious influencer, this Atlas, would bring them, or some of Lamb's treacherous bunch. She could have been a KGB agent all along, and if they were invaded by the Soviets, or the Brits, or the USA, then what? Only the extraordinary abilities provided by plasmids could protect Rapture from outsiders, so Adam must go on. He needed the little sisters more than ever.
If she took any little sisters with her, plasmid production will be drastically undercut.
Yes. Suchong smoothed his greaseback hair thoughtfully. We will need more little sisters.
Well, there's no time to wait for more people to... I'll tell Cavendish to see to it we have a few more. Until something else is worked out.
Ryan tossed the pencil on the desk.
As for Bridget Tenenbaum, we shall find her. If you betray me, Doctor, I warn you, things will not go well.
Suchong smiled sadly. I would not respect you, if that were not the case, Mr. Ryan. Suchong bowed, then he hurried to the door, bent on his mission. A whisking sound, and Ryan turned to see a small package arrive for him in the pneumotube. The handwriting told him it was from Sullivan. He removed it from the tube and opened it. It contained a reel of recording tape and a note in Sullivan's handwriting.
Don't think you'll see me alive again, sir. I plan a quick get-together with a bullet. Can't live with what I done. She had the cutest little red and black blanket. Here's a tape. Might clue you in on why Jasmine Jolene moved out. Why she's been ducking you. Owe you that, I guess, great man. Now I owe myself something else. A little drinky, a little bye-bye. Bye-bye, great man.
Ryan stared at the note, then looked at the tape. He was strangely reluctant to listen to it. At last, he put it in the tape player and pressed play.